Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday with you again. And we are going to conclude 1 Samuel today and open up 2 Samuel. But before I do, I want to make mention of the fact that something I forgot to say last week with the Witch of Endor. A case was made for the real Samuel being conjured up, and I agree with that. Others believe it was an apparition, a demonic thing from the witch. Here's something to consider. When Samuel was called up, the witch shrieked, seemed to be in fear. This was not familiar to her because that was not one of her apparitions. So that's another reason why I believe it was the real Samuel. God overruled that whole thing and caused it to manifest for his purposes. So we get to the end of chapter 31. Saul knows his fate. Courageously, he still goes out to battle with Jonathan and the army against the Philistines. You would think in the years that have passed here, while Saul's still alive, he would have fortified his defenses, strengthening them against the enemy, but he doesn't. What he does is he uses up a lot of energy and time in his fruitless attempt, his obsession to murder David. He's not getting any answer from God. The Urim, the Thummim, no prophets are speaking to him. So he goes out into the battle. The Philistines have a strong military. They're known for their archery. Israel was known for hand-to-hand combat. You can see the advantage goes to the Philistines here. So in chapter 31, it says Saul is mortally wounded, probably by arrows. Jonathan is slain. And a lot of the army is looking at Saul like, what do we do here? And he's about to die. And here's an interesting story. He wants his armor bearer, which the commentators believe is this Doeg who killed the priests at Nob. He says, draw your sword, I'm in verse 4, pierce me through with it, otherwise these uncircumcised will come and pierce me through and make sport of me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. Now we've got a different story as we break open 2 Samuel. An Amalekite, a foreigner, comes along in the scene of the battle, and Saul apparently is not dead. And he's asking him, the Amalekite, to take his sword and pierce him through. And then he in verse 9, it says, please stand beside me, kill me, for agony has seized me because of my life still lingering in me. People think this was a fabricated story by the Amalekite. Why? Because he took the crown and the bracelet from Saul and he goes back to David and he says, here, I have killed your enemy. This is the man who is pursuing you and trying to murder you, and I have done it. David does not have any kind of sense of reward for this man. What does he say? He gets the story out from him, and then he says, where are you from? He says, I'm an Amalekite. I'm the son of an alien. And David says in verse 14, how is it you were not afraid to stretch out your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? He calls the young men, go, cut him down, and he died. He says, your blood is on your own head, for your mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed. Remember, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, I said, even if the person is not fulfilling the role that he's been assigned by God in a righteous manner, the office still needs to be revered. And that's what David does here. And then the Amalekite dies. David recites a beautiful poetic memorial for Saul and Jonathan. It's one of the most renowned pieces of literature in the scriptures. He's talking about Jonathan, his love for him, his covenant with him. And even Saul, he forgives him and, basically honors him. after he dies. So we have this piece here. You can read it for yourselves. It's too lengthy for me to read here. I don't want to take up the time to do it. But it is an attachment to Jonathan and speaks of Saul's good qualities. Do we do that with people who oppose us and are critical against us? That's a real test of character right there. If we do, we're Christ-like. If we say, well, he got what was coming to him, that isn't a godly manner in which we are to show honor to people. So that's what happens here. David is instructed by the Lord to go to Hebron, which is in the southern part of Israel, where he will be anointed king by the men of Judah, his own tribe. Those to the north, Israel, are still under the auspices of Saul, even though he's slain. We have a man named Abner. I think we introduced him last week. Abner is the captain of Saul's army. And what he does is he fails to recognize David at first in any way as a ruler. And that results in civil war. Look at chapter 3. It says a long war, probably 7.5 years, the commentators believe. The war between the house of Saul, the house of David. David grows stronger. The house of Saul grows weaker. We also have a surviving son of Saul by the name of Ishbosheth. Abner, as is the custom, thinks he should be the reigning monarch since he is the descendant of Saul. So he appoints him ruler over the northern tribes, Israel. And Ishbosheth is a weak, inadequate ruler. He doesn't last long, and he is, there's nothing really in him that would inspire people to follow him. However, he did rebuke Abner for violating one of Saul's concubines. That was a pretension to the crown. So maybe Abner had some, ambition there, seeking the monarchy for himself. We don't know. So Ishbosheth is the king for a short period of time. And then we have a battle taking place. We have Joab, remember him, the unscrupulous captain of David's army, and Abner, the captain of Saul's army. Their armies come together. It looks like there's going to be a clash. Turns out to be a pretty intense battle. David's men prevail. Abner flees. The brother of Joab, a man named Asahel, very fleet-footed, goes after Abner, singles him out, looking to kill him. Abner doesn't want to do that. I mean, he's Joab's brother. That would be foolish to do that, but he's got no choice. He turns around quickly and thrusts his sword through Asahel, and he dies. So this is important here because Joab is going to look for revenge. And later in chapter 3, we see he and Abner come together. There's some talk. Abner is the one guy, really, if you think about it, who can negotiate, cut a deal with these tribes, the north and the south, to make David king. That's what he is eventually looking to do. He sees Ishbosheth as not the answer. He is reluctantly putting himself in that position. He knows how crazy that would be. So he is seeing David gaining strength and is using the incident to transfer the kingdom over to David. However, there is something that David wants to have happen to him. Now, before I say that, it also speaks about David taking on more wives. Can you believe that? He already has. I lost count by this time. So he wants Michal, the daughter of Saul, who was previously his wife, to be returned to him. Ishbosheth, her brother, concedes. Abner says, you can have her. Now, why in the world would David want Michal back? He really wasn't divorced from her. Saul gave her to another man, so it wasn't a violation of the law. But I believe it was probably for political reasons. I think some time had gone by where he wasn't with her. But in order to bring the north back under David's monarchy, it was a political maneuver. And so they agree to do that. And Michal becomes David's wife again. Now, Abner is looking to reunite both kingdoms. It was smart of him to wait and not take the lead in this. The Lord was removing certain people and bringing other people into place. Personal interests seem to have diminished. And we see Abner murdered by Joab in chapter 26 through 30. David mourns. He is showing the people he had no part in this crime whatsoever. And he was kind of wise to wait on God here. Abner is removed. And then even Ishbosheth is murdered on his own bed by two of his own men. And they bring his head to David in chapter 4, thinking they're going to receive a reward like the Amalekite did for supposedly killing Saul. So we have Ishbosheth struck down. They take his head. They go all the way to David, to Hebron. And this is what the answer is from David. He says, "Behold, Saul's dead, and thought the Amalekite was bringing me good news. How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, shall I not require his blood from your hand and destroy you from the earth?" And they cut up the young men. They cut their hands and feet, and they bury them in along with the head of Ishbosheth and in the grave of Abner. So now all these people are removed, and except for Joab, and we have David anointed as king. Israel is being united here. Now he sees the need for a capital. In the south, Hebron is unsuitable, too far geographically to the south. Gibeah would have been Saul's capital, and that was in Benjamite territory. They didn't want to do that. Benjamin and Judah had resentment toward one another. Shiloh, where the previous capital was under a curse. Now it comes to David to make Jerusalem the capital. They have to get rid of Jebusites who are occupying the upper part of Jerusalem. Joab goes and takes it. The ravines there made it very secure and formidable, so that made it a presentable capital. A lot of difficulties for David. And I think it's really to our benefit, our character, when we deal with hardships, trials, difficulties early on in life. They played an important part in David's reign. If you get things too easily handed to you, I think misfortune can come upon you if they come too easily, too quickly, without much effort on your part, without stretching and growing. So this is what's happening to David. Now he's ready to take the whole kingdom of Israel under his auspices. There's another battle with the Philistines. Now they're going to be really taken out of the picture. A frontal assault. And then in chapter 6, I believe it is. Yes, chapter 6, another strategy. There's another battle taking place, and the Lord speaks to David in verse 23. He says, "You shall not go directly up, circle around behind them, come at them in front of the balsam or mulberry trees. When you hear the sound of marching at the top of the trees, you shall act promptly, because then the Lord will have gone out before you to strike the army of the Philistines." Here's an interesting revelation, if you will, for the church age. The moving of the trees represents the moving of the Spirit. It was wind, spirit, pneuma, that was blowing in the trees, and that was the sign that David was to go in this direction, not a frontal assault. Sometimes we think, well, I did it this way before, and God blessed it, and I got victory. I'm going to do it again. It may not be the moving of the Spirit. It may not be the direction and guidance of the Spirit. We've got to wait on God for his timing, you see. It can't just be a formula, a pattern that we developed and we say, this is the way it should be done. The Lord may change directions and show us a different way. So that's what happens. The spirit of the Philistines is broken after this, and they don't become a major force anymore to deal with David anymore. The last thing that happens here is the taking up of the Ark of the Covenant being brought to Jerusalem to establish it as the holy city. All the tribes were in agreement that Jerusalem should be the capital. So there's unification. And they take the Ark of the Covenant, which we saw earlier on. The Philistines had captured it in the days of Hophni and Phinehas, the wicked priests. And David's men put it on a cart, and they're, moving it toward Jerusalem. The road was rough. The cart begins to shake, and one of the men that is kind of there, named Uzzah, tries to steady it with his hand, and the Lord strikes him down. Some people might say, that doesn't seem fair. He had good intentions. Good intentions, a lot of times, is not the way the Lord works. It's obedience. What was the deal here? It was a violation that they would put the ark on cattle to bring in. That was a Philistine method. The ark was meant to be carried by the Levites. David either forgot this or he, ignored it, whatever he did. Now fear is in the people because Uzzah is struck down. Ignorance doesn't excuse guilt. So David's puzzled. He sends the ark away to the home of a Gittite who is blessed, and he gets research as to how to transport it, sees in the law that it's meant to be carried by Levites. So that happens now. And there's celebration and singing and rejoicing. Everything looks great. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, rebukes David at the end of chapter 6. How has the king of Israel distinguished himself today? He uncovered himself in the eyes of servants, maids, and is one who acts foolishly, shamelessly uncovering himself. David says, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me ruler over all the people, over Israel. Therefore today I will celebrate before the Lord. I'll be more lightly esteemed than this, and will be humble in my own eyes, but with the maids of whom you've spoken, with them I will be distinguished. Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. Michal was David's love as a young man, teenager, young adulthood. He's fleeing from Saul for 10 years. People change over the course of time. Michal, the pride of position of her father, which she inherited, probably, put her in opposition to David here. She didn't really embrace his devotional nature. She thought that was a lowering of the dignity of the crown. And what happens? The scales fall off of David's eyes. This woman is not the same as she was in her youth. And she's childless. She doesn't share in David's honor and celebrity at all. So I'm going to end here, and we're going to get into some other things next week. Bathsheba. Right here and a little bit further on is the high water mark of David's kingship. But that is not going to last long. David made many mistakes. Even as a man after God's own heart, he made mistakes, which gives hope to us. But that's the story here, and I think I covered just about everything. And David's waiting on God, and that was his posture here. There was no strategy. You had to wait for God to elevate you into a position of authority and leadership. So many times people get aspiring to motivate out of their own initiative, ambition, whatever, and they create problems. Waiting on God is the key. So next week I will see you. We'll talk about Bathsheba. Have a good weekend.